I pushed open the conference room door with a court reporter at my shoulder and my grandmother's voice in my pocket. The hinges complained like something old and polite, forced to witness rudeness. A wall of eyes turned. My aunt's thin smile thinned further. The senior partner's pen stopped. The Boston skyline glinted beyond floor-to-ceiling glass, as if the city were taking notes too. I kept walking, one hand wrapped around the flash drive on a lanyard under my blazer, the other motioning the court reporter toward the head of the polished table. "My name is Rhea Calder," I said. "Breath steady, pulse not. I'm an interested party under the estate of Evelyn Marchmont. We'll be going on the record." The hinges complained like something old and polite, forced to witness rudeness. A wall of eyes turned. My aunt's thin smile thinned further. The senior partner's pen stopped. The Boston skyline glinted beyond floor-to-ceiling glass, as if the city were taking notes too. I kept walking, one hand wrapped around the flash drive on a lanyard under my blazer, the other motioning the court reporter toward the head of the polished table. "My name is Rhea Calder," I said. "Breath steady, pulse not. I'm an interested party under the estate of Evelyn Marchmont. We'll be going on the record." The hinges complained like something old and polite, forced to witness rudeness. A wall of eyes turned. My aunt's thin smile thinned further. The senior partner's pen stopped. The Boston skyline glinted beyond floor-to-ceiling glass, as if the city were taking notes too. I kept walking, one hand wrapped around the flash drive on a lanyard under my blazer, the other motioning the court reporter toward the head of the polished table. "My name is Rhea Calder," I said. "Breath steady, pulse not. I'm an interested party under the estate of Evelyn Marchmont. We'll be going on the record." The hinges complained like something old and polite, forced to witness rudeness. A wall of eyes turned. My aunt's thin smile thinned further. The senior partner's pen stopped. The Boston skyline glinted beyond floor-to-ceiling glass, as if the city were taking notes too. I kept walking, one hand wrapped around the flash drive on a lanyard under my blazer, the other motioning the court reporter toward the head of the polished table. "My name is Rhea Calder," I said. "Breath steady, pulse not. I'm an interested party under the estate of Evelyn Marchmont. We'll be going on the record." The hinges complained like something old and polite, forced to witness rudeness. A wall of eyes turned. My aunt's thin smile thinned further. The senior partner's pen stopped. The Boston skyline glinted beyond floor-to-ceiling glass, as if the city were taking notes too. I kept walking, one hand wrapped around the flash drive on a lanyard under my blazer, the other motioning the court reporter toward the head of the polished table. "My name is Rhea Calder," I said. "Breath steady, pulse not. I'm an interested party under the estate of Evelyn Marchmont. We'll be going on the record." The hinges complained like something old and polite, forced to witness rudeness. A wall of eyes turned. My aunt's thin smile thinned further. The senior partner's pen stopped. The Boston skyline glinted beyond floor-to-ceiling glass, as if the city were taking notes too. I kept walking, one hand wrapped around the flash drive on a lanyard under my blazer, the other motioning the court reporter toward the head of the polished table. "My name is Rhea Calder," I said. "Breath steady, pulse not. I'm an interested party under the estate of Evelyn Marchmont. We'll be going on the record."
Samson's recorder glowed brighter, as if sound were a sun rising an inch closer to us. "Before we play it," Gordon said, voice slipping toward the register people use on dogs and stubborn children, "let's remind ourselves that a voice memo doesn't rewrite legal documents. At most, it clarifies intent. It clarifies intent and triggers what Grandma put in writing," I said. "That's why you tried to hold this without me." Verity's lips created a thin white line. "You always wanted to be the hero. It's tedious." I thought of the last week I sat with Grandma in her Beacon Hill townhouse. sunlight slanting across bookshelves, the clock in the hall keeping time like a small, brave heart. I thought about the way she pressed my palm with the soft side of her thumb when words were hard. The way she told me that the truth was never a weapon when you carried it with care. Reflection, not flashback. I was here, and memory braided itself through the present like it always did when something mattered. "Please proceed," Enia said, voice steadier than her hands. She looked at me again, almost as if borrowing courage through eye contact. Brackett clicked play. Silence arrived first, then a rustle, chair against tile, the throat clearing of a woman who'd led boardrooms and Thanksgiving dinners with the same combination of grace and iron. When Grandma's voice came, it was older than the last time I heard it, and somehow stronger too. "If you're hearing this," she said, "it means I have left my stubborn old body behind. Good. It worked hard. Now listen." A small sound came from Verity, something halfway between a scoff and a whimper. Samson's keys made a music that didn't care. "I had time to consider everything," Grandma continued. "I am not confused. I am not coerced. I am Evelyn Marchmont, and I am as clear as the light over the Charles in October. I asked Nurse Alma to record this, and Miss Pruitt to witness. Mr. Brackett, you've known me long enough to know I don't waste words." The air changed. I could feel it in my arms, a fine vibration like a string pulled taut. "I have loved my daughter, Verity, as best I knew how, and I have tolerated her husband as best manners allow. I have also watched them manage me as if I were an account to be balanced. That will not do." Verity rose an inch from her chair, then sat. Color marched across her face in orderly bands. "I direct that the personal representative of my estate shall be my granddaughter, Rhea Calder. Mr. Brackett, I'm grateful for your diligence, but this is not your turn. Rhea, you are to work with Miss Pruitt. I have already provided her the memo that specifies distributions not reflected in the July will. It is labeled Envelope A. It remains sealed in the firm's vault until this recording has been played to all heirs." My hands found each other and gripped, as if they had been lost and surprised not to be alone. "That July document was for a season. This decision is for the truth. I have made a separate pour-over trust. All proceeds from the sale of the Beacon Hill house will fund the Marchmont Fellowship for Single Mothers in STEM to be administered by Rhea and Miss Pruitt for 10 years. Verity and Gordon will receive the Coastal Cottage in Rockport and Mother's jewelry box, except for the fountain pen, which belongs to Rhea. The Steinway is to go to St. Aidan's shelter. The books, all of them, are to follow Rhea wherever she lands." Brackett blinked twice, slowly, like a camera with a weak battery. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't stop the recording. Samson cleared his throat. Counsel, do you want me to mark that recording as Exhibit B and the envelope memo as C once produced? Yes, Anais said, not looking at Verity. Mark as B. And, Mr. Brackett, with your permission, I'll retrieve envelope A from the vault. Brackett nodded once, slowly. The silver in his hair seemed suddenly honest instead of ornamental. Bring it here. Verity turned to him. Henry, we've known you 30 years. You were at our wedding. I was, he said. And I was counseled to your mother for 40. Sit down. She sat. People sat when he used that voice. She didn't quite manage dignity with it, but she tried. Anais left the room, the door closing with a tactful sigh. Through the glass wall, I watched her cross the lobby to a small steel door, press a code, and disappear. My reflection in the glass was paler than it had been an hour ago. My hair, too earnest in a simple knot, made me look younger than I felt. I'll be contesting, Gordon said. Conversational, in the way storms sometimes speak just before they break. This is fraud. Someone faked that recording, or your little friend Pruitt manipulated Miss Marchman into signing something she barely understood. I'd be careful, I said. You're not on a golf course. This is Massachusetts, he said. Juries don't love granddaughters who show up with recordings and court reporters from Central Casting. Lucky for me, I'm not auditioning, and I didn't show up with a stereotype. I showed up with a record. Samson looked up for the first time, his eyes a clear gray that didn't presume. On the record, he said quietly. The door opened. Anais returned with a pale blue envelope. It had the weightless weight of something meant for a specific moment. She laid it in front of Brackett, who ran a practiced finger along the seal without opening it. Envelope A, he said, as referenced in Miss Marchman's directive. Verity leaned forward as if scenting a pie cooling on a windowsill. What's in it? Instructions, Anais said, and attachments. Financial records, I supplied, watching Gordon's eyes flick like minnows. From an accountant who suddenly discovered his conscience. Gordon's skin turned the color of raw clay. This is an ambush! This is accountability, I said. Ambushes happen in shadows. We're under lights and on the record. Verity laughed. It was no longer chalk. It was glass. You've always been sanctimonious. And you've always misunderstood boundaries for cruelty, I said, surprising even myself with the clarity of it. Brackett opened the envelope with a letter opener shaped like a miniature oar, as if he intended to row us across this moment whether or not we helped. He removed a typed memo on the firm's letterhead and a stapled packet of numbers. He read in silence, mouth tightening, then passed them to Anais. She skimmed, swallowed, nodded, and slid the papers towards Samson for marking. Exhibit C, she said. Marked, Samson murmured, ink whispering over a small sticker that would make this afternoon legible long after our tempers cooled. Brackett set the letter opener down with care. It appears, he said, that Miss Marchman was aware of transfers from a trust account into a joint account controlled by Mr. and Mrs. Shaw in June and July. The amounts are not trivial. The accountant provided bank logs. There is a notarized statement. Verity's hands remained knotted, white, the tendons like strings that carried too much music. These were reimbursements, Gordon said. We covered medical expenses when the facility had delays. We were simply paid back. Anais's eyebrow rose by a millimeter. In cash? Gordon's mouth opened and closed. The city beyond the glass looked on without malice. Cities don't have time for malice. They have schedules. I drew out my grandmother's fountain pen from my bag. It was teal, scratched in places that spelled out summers and board meetings, and recipes signed with cursive that bent like cattails. I set it gently on the table. Grandma said this was mine. It's symbolic, but I'm thinking of what it means to sign my name without shrinking. Verity's gaze snapped to the pen. Something in her face betrayed a tenderness she didn't know how to hide fast enough. Mother loved that pen, she said,
And the way she said it was not a weapon. It was a wound. I know. She taught me to refill it at the kitchen island when I was 8. She said ink was like courage. It stains. It should. Anais slid a new folder on the table. She was all briskness again, the tears tucked away somewhere safe. Mr. Brackett, with your permission, we should formalize the change in personal representative. There are filings to make with the probate court. Miss Calder, you'll need to sign form MPC 455 to accept the appointment. The court will issue a new letter of authority. Brackett nodded slow as a tide. Prepare the forms. We'll schedule an emergency status conference with Judge Kearns. If there are objections, we'll air them there. Gordon threw up his hands. You can't just... We can, Brackett said, without raising his voice, and we will. The conference room air thinned and then thickened as if pressure had changed. People underestimate logistics until they are the ones being organized. I breathed with deliberate steadiness, counting 4, holding 4, releasing 6. The old trick did more than keep panic from flying. It made room for the next thought to land. You'll need to play the recording again in court, I said, and we'll retrieve the blue envelope from the library wall today before anyone can disturb it. Verity's head snapped toward me. Library wall? You heard her, I said. South wall, behind the portrait. I stood. The chair's legs spoke a polite wooden farewell against the rug. Samson paused, hands hovering over keys, then resumed. A transcript doesn't breathe. It survives what we do to it. This meeting isn't over, Brackett said. No, it's barely started. My phone hummed against my hip. I ignored it until the second buzz, then glanced. A text from a number I didn't know. The preview line read, You don't know me, but I knew your grandmother when she was 19. Do not open the blue envelope without me there. The world narrowed to a straw. I forced myself to drag breath through it. I pressed the side button, and the haptic silence clicked like an oath. I have a contractor waiting at the house, Gordon said, seizing on a lie wrapped in scheduling. We were going to address some water damage in the library this afternoon. No one is touching the library, I said. Not until we open that envelope in front of witnesses. Witnesses? He repeated, as if tasting a new word and finding it bland. Anais began to collect the exhibits with the tenderness of a librarian returning first editions to their cases. I'll call the court now, she said. If we're lucky, we can get on the late afternoon calendar. Make it happen, Brackett said. He looked at me, then at Verity and Gordon, then at the skyline. We're going to do this correctly. Correctly, Verity echoed, and I could not tell if she meant it or if she was only practicing. We left together, unwillingly ceremonial. The corridor smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and money. The elevator swallowed us in a small mirror and fluorescent quiet. Gordon touched his lapis cuffins like they were talismans that could rearrange math. Verity's hand found the center seam of her blouse and smoothed nothing. It doesn't have to be ugly, I said to the elevator doors, because sometimes metal listens better than people. Grandma said legacy, not theater. Then she shouldn't have humiliated her own daughter from beyond the grave, Verity said, the words breaking like clamshells. She asked for a record. Humiliation hates light. We emerged into a lobby of bronze plaques. The security guard looked up from his paperback and offered a nod he probably gave to anyone who walked through the noon hour with a face like a held note. Outside, the October air bit my cheeks and made me grateful to feel something that wasn't duty or anger. Ria, Anais said, catching my sleeve just beyond the revolving door. Who texted you? I showed her the screen. She frowned. Unknown. Could be someone fishing. Could be someone who actually knew your grandmother as a girl. She grew up in Dorchester, I said. She took the trolley to nursing school. There are people who remember everything about who she was before she became a donor and a board member. We can't open that envelope alone, Anais said. Not after those transfers. We'll need a neutral witness. Samson? The court reporter rolled up beside us like a thoughtful tank.
My schedule's clear until 3, he said. If you want an independent record at the house, I can be there. Please, I said, and meant it beyond logistics. A neutral witness is a kindness disguised as paperwork. Verity brushed by, perfume knifing the air. Don't you dare set foot in Mother's house without me, she said. That library is part of my inheritance. Everything is part of legacy, I said. Inheritance is only what you can carry away. Legacy is what follows you home. Very poetic, the tiny voice of insecurity said. I let it say its piece and kept moving. The city rang with horns, and a siren summoner found a street to own. We crossed toward the parking garage, shoes ticking, Samson's steno case humming over seams in the concrete like a tuning fork. At my car, I hesitated. The flash drive was back on the lanyard, warm against my skin. The pen lay in my bag like a curled animal trusting me to be steady. I slid into the driver's seat and set my hands at 10 and 2, because sometimes you need small rules when the big ones are louder than your pulse. 2 cars, Anais said, climbing into her sedan. I'll follow you. Samson, you ride with me? He nodded, stowing his machine like a violin. Happy to. We pulled out into noon traffic, turned on Beacon, and threaded the kind of Boston maze that makes locals aggressive and visitors humble. The gold dome of the State House threw light onto a bus that seemed to be a moving advertisement for belonging. I read the alumni slogans and thought about how institutions pretend to be families, and families pretend to be institutions. And in both cases, you're better off when the rules are written down. At the first red light, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I let it buzz. The next time it did, I answered on speaker, eyes on the crosswalk where a man in a Red Sox cap pushed a stroller with the quiet seriousness of a soldier carrying something irreplaceable. Rhea, a voice said, older, female, New Englanded by decades. This is Alma Ritchie. I was the nurse who recorded your grandmother. Do not open that envelope without me. I'm 5 minutes away from Beacon Hill. You texted me? I said. I did. I had your number from Ms. Marchmont's instructions. She wanted me there when you opened it. She said it would make sense when you saw me. Come to the house, I said. We're 20 minutes out. Good. I'm bringing a copy of the competency assessment from the hospital for the hard of hearing in that law office. Thank you, I said, and meant it like a glass of water after a long story. The light turned green. We drove. Traffic did what traffic does. Argued, without malice. In my mirror, Anais kept pace, focused as a metronome. Samson stared out the window like a man who knows how to be a witness, even when no one is calling the record. Beacon Hill arrived like a memory that kept its paint fresh. We turned onto the narrow street where brownstones leaned into one another like conspirators, and old trees considered us the way the elderly consider toddlers, anxious affection spiked with skepticism. I parked in front of Grandma's townhouse, the one with the lion door knocker that looks like it has seen real lions. Anais pulled in behind me. Samson hauled his case with the calm efficiency of a paramedic. Verity and Gordon weren't far behind. They parallel parked with surprising grace for people who had just lost choreography. Verity adjusted her blouse again. It was becoming a nervous metronome I could set my anger to if I wasn't careful. I reached the door and placed my palm against the cool brass of the lion. Hi, I said under my breath, and I didn't care if anyone heard. We're home. The lock turned the way it always had for me. The foyer smelled like beeswax, lemon, and old books, a liturgy of domesticity. I stepped aside for Samson to wheel in his machine. He set up in the archway to the library as if a courtroom could bloom anywhere if you watered it enough with vowels. Do you want lights? He asked. Open the drapes, I said. Grandma hated overhead lighting. She said it makes everyone look like a question she doesn't want answered. Sun angled through the tall windows, revealing dust that made the air look honest. The library held itself like someone who knew their worth without needing compliments. Books flanked the fireplace in clean ranks. The portrait over the mantel watched with kindly menace particular to ancestors. I said, "South wall. That one." We stood facing the portrait of my great-grandmother, a woman whose black dress had been painted to reflect light the way grief sometimes does, by holding it gently instead of swallowing it. I reached up to the frame. The wood had a notch on the underside I'd always thought was a flaw. My fingers found the notch and pressed. The frame released with a reluctant sigh and swung an inch. Samson noted the time in a voice that fell like small bright stones into a deep, clear pool. On the record, the south wall portrait has been opened by Miss Calder at 1:07 p.m. Footsteps clicked behind us. I turned. A woman with hair like spun nickel and eyes like tidewater stood in the doorway, breathing as if she had run and chosen not to show it. She wore scrubs under a cardigan, a badge clipped to her pocket. Alma Ritchie, RN. "I'm here," she said. "Don't touch the envelope yet." Verity made a dismissive sound. "This is absurd." "It is prudent," Alma said, and the way she said it made the word feel muscular. She crossed to me, palms open. "Ria, you look like your grandmother did when she had made up her mind and was waiting for the rest of us to catch up." I stepped aside. The frame swung further on a hidden hinge and revealed the shallow recess behind it. The blue envelope lay inside, like a calm sky captured. Alma put on nitrile gloves with the competence someone trained to turn care into ritual. "Your grandmother gave me this instruction. If they tried to hold the reading without you, if there were questions, if the envelope needed sunlight, open it with you and with a record." "On the record," Samson repeated, gently, ready. I reached for the envelope, then stopped. My phone vibrated one more time. The unknown number again. A new text. One line only. "Do not let Verity touch that envelope. It's about her." I didn't turn to look at my aunt. I didn't need to. Some gravity announces itself by changing the way your bones feel in your body. I nodded once to Alma. She nodded back. "Are we doing this?" Anais asked, voice calm, pen poised. "We are," I said. I took the envelope's edge between my fingers. The paper was thick, a good stock chosen by someone who understood that messages have weight even when they try to be light. The glue gave way under pressure with a soft little sound that made my skin go hot. "On the record," Samson said, "the envelope is being opened." The front door blew inward on a sudden gust. All our bodies flinched as one organism as a shape crossed the foyer and entered the library without apology. A man in a charcoal suit, tall, late 50s, a briefcase with initials too discreet to be vanity. He carried another envelope, white, large, with a crimson seal. "Stop," he said, breath even, authority worn like a ring. "This," he raised the white envelope, "is a later will."
They didn't speak while Grandma's voice filled the chamber. The court recorder's keys fluttered like a mechanical bird, catching every syllable. I watched Clara's mouth press into a line so thin it could have cut paper. Andrew's fingers tapped, once, twice, then went still. Lydia stared hard at the table as if she could force the grain to open and swallow the device whole. "This is Margaret Grant," Grandma said, steady and unafraid. "If you're hearing me, it means the people who loved my hands in the kitchen want to ignore my handwriting in the end. Don't. I am of sound mind and a stubborn disposition, and I have things to set right. First, Elowen is my personal representative. She has the patience for paperwork and the spine for conflict. Second, you'll find a sealed letter in my library, behind the framed map of the North Atlantic. The frame has a latch underneath. Open it with witnesses present. Third, for those who have treated my savings like a tide that only ever comes in, stop. I have seen the transfers. I forgive you, but forgiveness and free money are not cousins." Clara made a small, choking sound. Andrew shot her a look that said, "Control yourself." Lydia's knuckles bleached white around the edge of her folder. Grandma continued, voice softer but not weaker.
To St. Bridget's Shelter, I leave the cottage in Monhegan. To the public library, my first editions of Cather and Eliot. To Elowin, my ledger books and the rights to the little shop's name. To the three of you, Clara, Andrew, Lydia, I leave what you've earned by goodness, which is to say your share of the estate after debts, taxes, and the establishment of the Grant Fellowship, a fund for girls who are told to choose between kindness and competence. They needn't choose. The fellowship is to be administered by Elowin and an attorney not paid by Harlow and Kent. At that, Mr. Harlow visibly swallowed. The court recorder's fingers never faltered. The room held us the way a hand might hold water, careful, aware it could lose everything with a twitch. "And one more thing," Grandma said. The rustle of bedsheets briefly kissed the mic. "If anyone tampers with the letter behind the map or delays the release of this recording, open the blue envelope tucked under the false bottom of my desk and call Nurse Evelyn Rowe. Her number is with the envelope. She saw too much to indulge polite lies. Let the record show, I loved you, even when you made it inconvenient. Be better than your excuses." The recording clicked off. Silence isn't an absence. It's a pressure. It pressed on my ears until Mr. Harlow cleared his throat and let the room breathe again. "Well," he said, "that was, unorthodox, authentic, and sworn by the person whose estate we are discussing." Clara sprang to her feet. "This cannot stand. Audio? A child's toy." She jabbed a manicured finger at the recorder. "There are rules." "There are," I said, and I reached into my bag for the envelope I'd blot in case we hit this wall. I slid out copies, the notarized affidavit from Nurse Rowe confirming the date, time, and presence of witnesses when Grandma recorded her directives, the chain of custody letter I'd asked our neighbor Mr. Patel to sign when I placed the recorder in a sealed bag the morning after Grandma died, the email from the shelter confirming long-standing discussions about a bequest. The court recorder nodded when I said, "Mark these as Exhibits 1 through 4. She labeled each page with a small adhesive flag, neat as the corners of a well-made bed. Andrew didn't look at the papers. He looked at me. "You think you're clever," he said in the tone he used on cashiers who miscounted change. "But you don't understand how this works. A will read in chambers by the firm we've used for 40 years supersedes a directive that triggers a trust pause and appoints a different executor, me." I turned to Mr. Harlow. "You know the trust allows for recorded instructions regarding personal property and distribution timelines. You drafted it with her in 2016. He winced the way men do when a younger woman knows the exact year. "The clause exists," he conceded, "but these are significant changes." "That's why she addressed them, on record," I said, "and now, on the record." Lydia finally spoke. Her voice surprised me, low, almost kind. "We were there, Elle. We saw how tired she was. She didn't remember the names of Mrs. Bowman's grandsons. She forgot minuscule nouns," I said quietly. "She did not forget who she was or what she wanted. You know the difference." Lydia looked at her hands. A sliver of our childhood, two girls reading under a blanket fort, breathing in the same paper, tried to stand between us. It couldn't hold. Mr. Harlow laced his fingers. "Here is what we will do. I will petition the probate court for an emergency status conference. We will present the recording, the affidavits, and the existing will. The judge will decide whether to recognize Miss Grant as the personal representative. Until then, no assets will be distributed." "That's the correct path," I said, and relief rose in me like a bruise. Tender, undeniable. "We also need to secure the library at the house. There's a letter behind the map." Clara's head snapped toward me. "A what?" "You heard her. Behind the map. He knows. He stood under it a dozen holidays in that uneven rectangle of sun." Mr. Harlow glanced at the clock. "If we can reach Judge Hartley, we might appear at 4. Bring the recording device, the paperwork, and any witnesses therein." He looked at the court recorder. "Ms. Dina Arroyo," she said, efficient. "I'll prepare verbatim notes for the court and continue to record as needed." "Good," he said. "Elowin, please do not open any concealed letters until we are in a controlled setting." That's my plan, controlled and witnessed. I slid the recorder back into its padded sleeve, sealed it with a strip of blue tape, and signed the tape in ink that bloomed like a small brave bruise. Chain of custody, beginning to end. We broke in a choreography that had been waiting in the wings. Papers stacked, chairs pushed back, footsteps in the marble hall. In the reflection of a portrait, I caught my face and didn't recognize it at first. Sharper at the edges, not because I had become someone else, but because I had finally stopped rounding myself to fit.
They didn't speak while Grandma's voice filled the chamber. The court recorder's keys fluttered like a mechanical bird, catching every syllable. I watched Clara's mouth press into a line so thin it could have cut paper. Andrew's fingers tapped, once, twice, then went still. Lydia stared hard at the table as if she could force the grain to open and swallow the device whole. "This is Margaret Grant," Grandma said, steady and unafraid. "If you're hearing me, it means the people who loved my hands in the kitchen want to ignore my handwriting in the end. Don't. I am of sound mind and a stubborn disposition, and I have things to set right. First, Elowen is my personal representative. She has the patience for paperwork and the spine for conflict. Second, you'll find a sealed letter in my library, behind the framed map of the North Atlantic. The frame has a latch underneath. Open it with witnesses present. Third, for those who have treated my savings like a tide that only ever comes in, stop. I have seen the transfers. I forgive you, but forgiveness and free money are not cousins." Clara made a small, choking sound. Andrew shot her a look that said, "Control yourself." Lydia's knuckles bleached white around the edge of her folder. Grandma continued, voice softer but not weaker. "To St. Bridget's Shelter, I leave the cottage in Monhegan. To the public library, my first editions of Cather and Eliot. To Elowen, my ledger books and the rights to the little shop's name. To the three of you, Clara, Andrew, Lydia, I leave what you've earned by goodness, which is to say your share of the estate after debts, taxes, and the establishment of the Grant Fellowship, a fund for girls who are told to choose between kindness and competence. They needn't choose. The fellowship is to be administered by Elowen and an attorney not paid by Harlow and Kent." At that, Mr. Harlow visibly swallowed. The court recorder's fingers never faltered. The room held us the way a hand might hold water, careful, aware it could lose everything with a twitch. "And one more thing," Grandma said. The rustle of bedsheets briefly kissed the mic. "If anyone tampers with the letter behind the map or delays the release of this recording, open the blue envelope tucked under the false bottom of my desk and call Nurse Evelyn Rowe. Her number is with the envelope. She saw too much to indulge polite lies. Let the record show, I loved you, even when you made it inconvenient. Be better than your excuses." The recording clicked off. Silence isn't an absence. It's a pressure. It pressed on my ears until Mr. Harlow cleared his throat and let the room breathe again. "Well," he said, "that was, unorthodox. Authentic, and sworn by the person whose estate we are discussing." Clara sprang to her feet. "This cannot stand. Audio? A child's toy." She jabbed a manicured finger at the recorder. "There are rules." "There are," I said, and I reached into my bag for the envelope I'd blot in case we hit this wall. I slid out copies, the notarized affidavit from Nurse Rowe confirming the date, time, and presence of witnesses when Grandma recorded her directives, the chain of custody letter I'd asked our neighbor Mr. Patel to sign when I placed the recorder in a sealed bag the morning after Grandma died, the email from the shelter confirming long-standing discussions about a bequest. The court recorder nodded when I said, "Mark these as exhibits 1 through 4. She labeled each page with a small adhesive flag, neat as the corners of a well-made bed. Andrew didn't look at the papers. He looked at me. "You think you're clever," he said in the tone he used on cashiers who miscounted change. "But you don't understand how this works. A will read in chambers by the firm we've used for 40 years supersedes a directive that triggers a trust pause and appoints a different executor, me." I turned to Mr. Harlow. "You know the trust allows for recorded instructions regarding personal property and distribution timelines. You drafted it with her in 2016. He winced the way men do when a younger woman knows the exact year.
The clause exists, he conceded, but these are significant changes. That's why she addressed them, on record, I said, and now, on the record. Lydia finally spoke. Her voice surprised me, low, almost kind. We were there, Elle. We saw how tired she was. She didn't remember the names of Mrs. Bowman's grandsons. She forgot minuscule nouns, I said quietly. She did not forget who she was or what she wanted. You know the difference. Lydia looked at her hands. A sliver of our childhood, two girls reading under a blanket fort, breathing in the same paper, tried to stand between us. It couldn't hold. Mr. Harlow laced his fingers. Here is what we will do. I will petition the probate court for an emergency status conference. We will present the recording, the affidavits, and the existing will. The judge will decide whether to recognize Miss Grant as the personal representative. Until then, no assets will be distributed. That's the correct path, I said, and relief rose in me like a bruise. Tender, undeniable. We also need to secure the library at the house. There's a letter behind the map. Clara's head snapped toward me. A what? You heard her. Behind the map. He knows. He stood under it a dozen holidays in that uneven rectangle of sun. Mr. Harlow glanced at the clock. If we can reach Judge Hartley, we might appear at 4. Bring the recording device, the paperwork, and any witnesses therein. He looked at the court recorder. Ms. Dina Arroyo, she said, efficient. I'll prepare verbatim notes for the court and continue to record as needed. Good, he said. Elwyn, please do not open any concealed letters until we are in a controlled setting. That's my plan. Controlled and witnessed. I slid the recorder back into its padded sleeve, sealed it with a strip of blue tape, and signed the tape in ink that bloomed like a small brave bruise. Chain of custody, beginning to end. We broke in a choreography that had been waiting in the wings. Papers stacked, chairs pushed back, footsteps in the marble hall. In the reflection of a portrait, I caught my face and didn't recognize it at first. Sharper at the edges, not because I had become someone else, but because I had finally stopped rounding myself to fit.
Outside, the air held the mineral promise of rain. Lydia fell in beside me, voice low. Do you really think she meant to give you everything? She didn't, I said. You heard her, your shares after the fellowship and the debts. That's the same as nothing, she said, almost a whisper. It's not, I said, and it also isn't the point. What is the point, she asked as we reached the steps. To do what she asked, I said. Honestly. A beat passed that tasted almost like truce. Then Clara's tone sliced it. We're going to the house, she announced to Andrew, not to me. If there's a letter, I'm reading it first. You'll read it when we all do, with witnesses. She laughed without humor. You can't stop me. I looked at Dina. Can you come? She glanced at her watch. If we're quick, I can record on site before we head to court. We'll be quick, I said, and careful. By the time we reached Grandma's street, the first drops were dotting the windshield like punctuation marks in a sentence we hadn't finished. The house looked exactly as it always had. Brick shoulders, black shutters, a door that had held every version of me at least once and let her in with equal patience. In the foyer, I paused. Grief is a late train sometimes. It pulled in, now, slow and heavy, loaded with all the Sundays I'd meant to come earlier, and the soups we had made together, and the last crossword we left half done. I put my hand on the banister where hers always warmed the wood. We're here, I said, quiet enough that only the house could hear. Dina set up in the library door, the low whir of her machine a domestic sort of thunder. Andrew and Clara stood too close, trying to crowd me with presence. Lydia hung back, a ghost of hesitation in her posture. The map of the North Atlantic loomed over the mantel, a wash of blues and grays and small inky towns clinging to capes and bays. I felt along the underside of the frame and found the latch exactly where Grandma's voice had promised it would be. My fingers clicked it. The frame eased forward, revealing a shallow recess lined with velvet. Inside lay a long ivory envelope, sealed with a neat strip of tape and a thumbprint pressed and dark blue wax. Margaret's print. I knew it the way you know the bend in a path you walked 1,000 times. On the record, Dina said from behind me, the concealed compartment has been opened. A sealed envelope is present. The seal appears unbroken. I didn't touch it yet. We wait for Nurse Rowe. She was named. Clara rolled her eyes. If she even exists. She does, I said, and as if on cue, the doorbell chimed, a sound that made my throat ache because it had once meant friends and neighbors and cinnamon things on plates. Lydia went to answer. A woman in slate blue scrubs and a rain jacket stepped in, hair slicked back, eyes the calm of someone who has stood in other people's storms long enough to know most of them pass. "I'm Evelyn Rowe," she said, and held up her ID badge. "I was with Margaret when she recorded her directives. May I?" "Please." She shook rain from her sleeves, then approached the mantel with the kind of reverence that only looks like ritual if you've never had to put your hands on the hinge of someone else's life. "Hello, Margaret," she murmured. And what slid through me then wasn't pain so much as a clean severing of denial. Dina recorded her name and title. Andrew sighed dramatically. Clara whispered to him, too sharp to be nothing. "On the record," Nurse Rowe said, "I witnessed Mrs. Grant seal this envelope and place it here. She asked that it be opened in the presence of all heirs and a neutral witness. I'm satisfied those conditions are met." "Open it," Clara said, impatient, "if it even says anything that matters." Nurse Rowe glanced at me. "It's yours to open, Elowen." My hands didn't shake until I slid a nail beneath the tape. The paper lifted with a sigh that belonged to late afternoons and folded blankets. I eased out a single typed letter, then a second, handwritten. At the bottom of the recess lay a smalled blue envelope with a single name on it, Lydia. I read the typed letter first. It was addressed to "My children by law and by choice," in which category she had always placed me, stubbornly, lovingly. She outlined the same directives we'd heard, but she added specifics, account numbers, a timeline for listing the cottage, the contact person at the library, the attorney, not at Harlow and Kent, with whom she wanted me to register the fellowship. She noted a June transfer to an unfamiliar LLC and attached a copy of a bank statement annotated in her tidy script. Not mine. Clara's face flushed up to her hairline as I read out loud. Andrew's jaw worked. Lydia's eyes tracked each line as if the words might move if she blinked. Then I unfolded the handwritten letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, the drawer in her desk where she kept secrets and stamps. "L," it began. "You know I do not like to meddle, but some meddling is simply mothering in public. There is a blue envelope for Lydia because she will need the truth in her own hands. As for Clara and Andrew, they have always wanted more polished silver than full hearts. Do not let their noise convince you you are not allowed to be clear. I have made mistakes. I have forgiven what I could. But money makes liars of the gentle and geniuses of the cruel, and I won't have it in my house after I am gone." My voice wavered on house. I studied it. I turned the second page and read the last paragraphs, a list of practicalities mixed with a tenderness that bruised me fresh. At the very bottom, she had written, "If you meet resistance, go to Judge Hartley. She knows me. She knows what I endured to put this family on a sound foundation. She will not pretend not to see." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I lifted the blue one and held it out to Lydia. Her eyes filled so fast the room blurred around them. "Take it," I said. "It's yours." Clara made a sound like a knife on bone. "This is a performance." "No," I said, my voice low, untrying. "This is accountability." Andrew moved toward the mantel as if to grab the remaining papers. Dina's machine clicked faster, a transcription of escalation. "Do not touch the exhibits," Nurse Rowe said in a tone that could have stopped a stampede. He stopped. I gathered the documents that did not belong to any of them and slid them into a clear folder. "We leave now. We'll be late if we don't." Outside, the rain had settled into a rhythm. We loaded into cars like people who had already decided to keep moving no matter the weather. Dina followed in her gray sedan. Nurse Rowe rode with me, one palm around a thermos she had set in my cup holder, as if she'd known without asking that my hands would need something warm to hold. "Do you think the judge will listen?" I asked at a stoplight. The question tasted raw. "She will," Nurse Rowe said. "And if she hesitates, your grandmother's preparation will sustain her courage." She glanced sideways at me. "You know how to sustain other people's courage, Elowen. Your grandmother admired that about you." "What else did she say?" I asked, hoping and dreading. "That you always apologize for taking up space," she said, "and she hated that. She wanted you to own your feet on the floor." I did.
I pressed my heels into the mats like the pedal of a piano and felt something answer back up through my bones. By the time we reached the courthouse, we had 8 minutes to spare. Dina was already set up in the small courtroom when we entered, her machine poised like a bird about to prove flight. Judge Hartley's clerk, a woman with eyes like steel and a cardigan like a hug, ushered us to benches. Clara and Andrew swept in, trailing a lawyer I didn't know, a tall man with expensive rain on his shoulders, and the kind of briefcase that promised billable hours more than results. Counsel appears for the Shawls, he announced to no one and everyone. Attorney Simon Holt.
Mr. Harlow joined us, hair damp, tie askew in a way that made him look younger and more human. He nodded at me. Recorder? In my bag, I said, sealed and signed. He looked relieved. Good. The side door opened. Judge Hartley entered, all economy and focus. She sat. We stood. We sat when she asked us to. Afternoon, she said, voice deepened by years of other people's crises. I understand we have an urgent matter regarding the estate of Margaret Grant. This is not an evidentiary hearing. It's a status conference and a question of temporary authority. Keep your statements tight and your tone respectable. She looked at me first. Ms. Grant? I rose. Yes, Your Honor. Are you the LON named in the decedent's recorded directive? Yes. Do you have the device? Yes. I lifted the pouch with its blue tape and my name like a small boundary. She nodded at the clerk. Mark the pouch for identification. We'll hear a portion of the recording sufficient to establish intent. Heart. The room tightened, the air drawing itself into a smaller, brighter point. Andrew's knuckles whitened around the crowbar. The officer didn't flinch. Now, she said, weapon on the floor, step back, hands where I can see them. Her badge caught the library's soft light. Officer Marin. She stood with the poise of a metronome and the patience of a nurse, one palm open, the other hovering where training lived. Behind Andrew, Lydia whispered his name like a lifeline he could take or refuse. Don't make it worse, I said, calm as I could make it. We're on the record. Dina's keys never stopped. The steady clatter was blood pressure and sound, evidence staying alive. Andrew's chest rose and fell in shallow, furious breaths. He looked at the envelope in my hand, then at Holt, who wasn't moving. It's one thing to have a lawyer. It's another to have a lawyer step between you and your worst impulse. Holt didn't. Officer Marin did. Floor, she repeated, voice lower. Now. The crowbar clanged against the hearthstone and made the whole house wince. She kicked it away, cuffed him with a firmness that sounded like relief, then looked to me. Ma'am? I'm okay, I said, and realized my hands were shaking only when the photograph quivered. Everyone is a witness, she said, meaning it as instruction, not comfort. Continue what you were doing. I'll remain until I'm called elsewhere. She radioed for a second unit and guided Andrew to a dining chair with the practical care of someone who knew that dignity wasn't a resource you let spill, even when you had to interrupt a man mid-crime. Clara started to object and thought better of it. Lydia stood still as a tall candle and did not waver. I set the photograph on the desk. In the glossy image, the notary from Holt's document was beaming beside a man I didn't recognize, a logo from a different firm in the top corner of the clipboard. The timestamp in the lower right corner matched the very hour Holt's so-called later will claimed a signature. "On the record," I said, and my voice reorganized itself into something steadier. The photograph depicts the named notary witnessing a different client at the exact time marked on the contested will. It goes to impossibility. Harlow exhaled like a man who had been waiting to breathe. "Keep going," he murmured. I slid the remaining pages from the blue envelope. Printed emails, headers intact, a short notarized statement from an office assistant at Harlow & Kent describing a call in which Clara expressed urgency about a revised document, asking whether a signature could be accommodated bedside without too much fuss. And at the bottom, an audio transcript, a recorded confession by the same notary 2 days after the date on Holt's will. I read aloud. "I was offered cash to backdate a form. I didn't see the decedent sign. I was told it was routine. It is not routine. I am sorry. Signed and sealed." Holt's smile didn't crack, it evaporated. "That's unverified," he said thinly. "We will examine the authenticity of those statements." "You'll have a chance," Harlow replied, almost kindly. "In court." Officer Marin nodded towards Dina's machine. "That transcript will be evidence. Keep your distance from the exhibits unless asked. It was addressed to all of us and especially to the people who had learned to snatch things." Judge Hartley set a full hearing within 10 days. Harlow said to me, "Mind already composing outlines. We won't need all 10. We'll need enough to do it right," I said. I repacked the documents in clear sleeves, each labeled, the photograph on top like a brave little flag. Outside, the rain wrote on the windows. Inside, we organized the weather. The days that followed were exacting and oddly gentle, like being measured for something that would either fit or fail in public. We spent a morning with a forensic document examiner who taught me how paper remembers pressure. She slid known samples of Grandma's signature under magnification and showed me the places where a hand hesitates. People are symphonies. Forgeries are a single note pretending to be a song. Holt's document, in her opinion, had too much sameness. Grandma's ass curved differently on the days her hands hurt. The contested signature's S did not curve at all. It performed. Nurse Rowe produced the competency assessment, complete with the physician's notation, patient alert, oriented ×4, demonstrates capacity to understand financial matters. She also brought a tiny spiral notebook that Grandma had kept by her bedside. Dates, temperatures, small observations, such as tea too sweet today, or L called, sounded like Tuesday sunlight. Anyone who has watched someone fade knows the difference between a mind that drifts and a mind that rests. Hers had rested and risen, stubborn, clear. Lydia sat with me at my kitchen table, both of us drinking tea that we kept forgetting to sip. She had called the number on the back of the photograph from her envelope. A man with her cheekbones answered. His voice carried the rust of decades and the brightness of relief. They were careful with each other, building a bridge plank by plank. The night she met him in person, she texted me, "He cried when he saw me. I didn't apologize." I put my phone down and cried for all the apologies we'd said over the years for existing. Clara did what Clara did when cornered. She curated. She told mutual friends I had hijacked a funeral into a courtroom, that Grandma would have hated the spectacle, as if Grandma hadn't asked for the light herself. Andrew, on bond and temporary good behavior, sent a short text that was almost an apology and exactly a stall. "We should talk." I asked him to send it through counsel. He said I had changed. I told him I had stopped pretending. Dina's transcript of the first day read like a heartbeat rendered in vowels. Reading it made me feel braver. It also made me feel sad. Objects shouldn't have to carry so much of what humans drop. Still, I was grateful to the keys that had caught our worst hour and made it into something I could hold without burning. Harlow prepared me for testimony the way good teachers prepare students for a piano recital. We practiced starting at the beginning, staying narrow, naming things cleanly, not reaching for adjectives unless a noun would do. He said, "You don't need flourishes. You have facts. And you're calm." I wasn't sure about the second part, but I practiced the first until even my fear could recite it. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled faintly of bleach and raincoats. The corridor hummed the way hives hum, orderly, purposeful, a little dangerous. Dina sat up near counsel table, her machine anchored like a small boat in a rising tide. Officer Marin was present in the back, off-duty, curious and steady in civilian clothes. She gave a small nod that felt like a stitched seam holding. Judge Hartley entered with the quiet force of a weather front. "Good morning," she said.
We'll hear argument and testimony on the petition recognizing Miss Grant as personal representative, the validity of the decedent's recorded directive and associated instructions, and the purported later will. Holt opened because, of course he did. He spoke of respect for the dead while trying to disassemble the wishes of a woman who had planned her own clarity. He suggested that grief makes younger women overreach. He called the blue envelope dramatic. He called the notary's confession uncorroborated. Harlow didn't raise his voice when he responded. He laid out the trust clause. He introduced the photograph with its inconvenient timestamp. He walked through chain of custody like a parent teaching a child to cross a street. Look left, look right, keep moving. He called Nurse Rowe, who testified with the same practical tenderness she brought to bed checks. The words alert and oriented became small shields that fit perfectly in my hands. Then it was my turn. I took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and felt the oath settle over me like a coat that finally fit. Miss Grant, Harlow said, describe how you came to possess the recording. I described it. I received an email at 11:02 p.m. from a junior attorney at Harlow & Kent warning me that my name had been excluded from the family's invitation to the reading and that existed a supplemental directive. She included a file digest hash and wrote, "Bring a court reporter." I did. He guided me through the day in the chambers, the letter behind the map, the emergency envelope in the desk, Andrew's attempt at the exhibits, Officer Morin's intervention, the documents we turned over. My voice shook once when I spoke about the pen Grandma left me, and once again when I said she asked for a record because she knew we would need one.
Holt cross-examined with the soft, sharpened edges of a man accustomed to moving furniture with his tone. You're not a lawyer, Ms. Grant? No. You don't hold a certification in forensic document examination? No. So your assertion that the later will is false is, at best, an opinion. It's an opinion, I said, and an observation supported by an expert, a photograph with a timestamp, a confession, and a clause your clients either didn't read or didn't respect. If a room can smile, the courtroom did. The clerk looked down quickly. Hartley's mouth did not move, which was her version of a smile. Holt pivoted. You dislike my clients, don't you? I love my family, I said. I dislike lies. He tried again, and then he stopped, because even the best litigators know when a witness isn't a seam to pry, but a stitch holding two halves together. He sat. The document examiner testified after me. She was crisp, without cruelty. She let her science be exactly itself. It is my opinion that the signature on the contested will is not contemporaneous with the decedent's known signatures and shows signs of slow, hesitant stroke inconsistent with her natural hand, she said. And if anyone yawned, they did it behind transformed faces. Finally, Hartley leaned forward. I have heard enough. She tapped her pen once against the bench, a gavel in miniature. Findings: the trust clause is valid and permits recorded instructions and appointment of a personal representative. The recorded directive is reliable. The court recognizes Ms. Grant as personal representative. The so-called later will is rejected pending further investigation for potential fraud. The court refers this matter to the district attorney's office for review. Temporary restraining orders remain on all estate assets until inventory and initial distributions are approved. Clara's breath left her as if she had been holding it for a month. Andrew stared at the table like it might offer him a different ending if he memorized the grain. Lydia's shoulders dropped the smallest distance, and in that distance a life could fit. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt right-sized, as if the room had been a pair of shoes that finally matched my feet. Ms. Grant, the judge added, voice softened 1 degree, your grandmother was a planner. Honor her by being one too. Yes, Your Honor, I said. We honored her by starting not with money, but with names. The fellowship paperwork took shape in a quiet corner of the library with the windows open to the smell of wet brick. We called it the Margaret Grant Fellowship for Girls Who Build. The first board meeting consisted of me, Harlow,
and by my insistence, 2 women Grandma had mentored at the shop decades ago who had since become, respectively, an engineer and a teacher. We made a list of what we would fund: laptops, childcare stipends, community college tuition, small grants for science fair projects that required more than poster board. We decided to require essays not about hardship, but about curiosity. We agreed to measure success not by headlines, but by homework completed on kitchen tables that still smelled like dinner. We honored her by packing the cottage with the shelter's director, a woman with a voice like a sturdy sweater. We walked the rooms with clipboards and memories, deciding what would stay, what would be auctioned for the fund, what would be given to families who needed to sleep in a place that felt briefly like a promise kept. I stood in the small bedroom where I had drawn stars on the ceiling with a glow pen when I was 9, and felt grief arrive, the kind that doesn't topple you but sits beside you and holds your hand while you do the right thing. We honored her by calling the public library and saying, "We have first editions of Cather and Eliot," and listening to a silence that became joy. The librarian cried when she saw my Antonia in Grandma's meticulous mylar. She said, "We'll put her name on the book plates. People will touch the past, and the past will touch back." Clara and Andrew resisted, then negotiated, then complied when compliance became the only adult option. Holt became less lacquered as the days went on. He stopped smiling so much. He stopped returning some calls. When the district attorney's office reached out, he retained counsel, which is a sentence that looks like a mirror if you want to know what people believe about their own innocence. Lydia took small, brave steps into a life that had room for her. She met the man in the photograph twice, 3 times. She met his wife, who cried in a way that made me forgive her preemptively for anything she might ever do. I watched my sister laugh without checking anyone's face to see if it was allowed. I took a picture of that laugh and texted it to Nurse Rowe with a single word: "Look." She wrote back, "I am." One evening, I sat alone in the library with Grandma's fountain pen in my hand and the inventory spreadsheet open on my laptop. The house sounded different when you weren't listening for footsteps that were never coming back. It sounded less like a museum and more like a chest you're packing for a trip you mean to survive. I wrote letters to people who had never expected to receive anything from us. I signed checks with a name that felt both exactly mine and freshly acquired. I set aside a small box of things that smelled of cedar and winter: recipe cards worn at the edges, the little brass weight Grandma used when she rolled out pastry, a knit scarf that still held something of her shoulder in its stitches. I didn't know where I would keep them. I only knew I would. When the first fellowship acceptance emails went out, the replies came back with exclamation points that looked like children standing straight. One girl wrote, "I thought science was for people whose mothers drive them to camp. Mine works nights. Now I get to go anyway." Another, "I'm going to be the first one in my family to own a toolbox that's not pink because somebody else chose it for me." I forwarded them to Lydia and to Nurse Rowe, and yes, to Judge Hartley's clerk, who wrote back a single emoji, a gavel, and a heart. The final hearing on the fraud allegations was quieter than the first. Holt's firm had withdrawn the contested document and claimed it had been provided to them by overzealous clients. The notary, facing his own consequences, testified plainly. He did not look at Clara or Andrew. He looked at his hands. He said the money wasn't much and the shame was a lot. He apologized to the court and to me. I accepted the apology that belonged to me. I left the rest to the system that could work when it wanted to. Hartley issued a short order from the bench. The court finds the later document invalid, sanctions to be determined at a separate proceeding. The estate will proceed under Ms. Grant's authority and the decedent's recorded directive. She closed the file with a firm, careful motion that looked like tucking in a child. Outside, the sky was the kind of blue punctuation uses when a story had ended the way it was meant to. Lydia squeezed my hand. She would be proud, she said. "She is," I said, surprising myself with the tense. I didn't correct it. Some grammar is a kind of faith. Clara approached us in the periphery of the steps, moving like someone who had burned a recipe and wanted to talk about ovens, not choices. She said, "I'm sorry." The words were grudging and real at once. "For the way I treated you, for the way I treated her wishes. I can accept the apology. I can't accept fraud." "I know," she said, and for a second she looked like the girl she might have been if parenting had been a school that taught different lessons. She said, "I don't know who I am if I'm not—" She gestured at the house that didn't exist in this place. "You're someone's sister," I said, and watched the line land between us and pull taut and not break. We didn't hug, we didn't need to. We would never be close in the way we had once pretended to be at holidays, but the air between us gave up some of its old job of carrying a fight, and that was enough work for one afternoon. A month later, the library smelled like paper and beginnings. The fellowship website went live. The cottage's keys jingled in the palm of a woman who had slept in her car last winter and cried when we handed her a set engraved "Soon Home." The first editions sat in glass at the public library, where children pressed their noses to the case and learned that the past did not live in towers, but in towns, in rooms, in houses where women with pens said, "Not this way, this way." I wore Grandma's scarf on a walk along the river. The wind tugged it, and I let it. I passed a coffee shop where a girl with a physics textbook looked up from a problem set and smiled at me without knowing she had inherited anything from me, besides maybe a little of the air I'd just moved. At home, the fountain pen waited. When I signed the last check of the day, ink bloomed into the paper like something alive and certain. I pressed a blotter over it and lifted it, and the signature shone. The phone rang. I answered. "Ms. Grant? This is the clerk for Judge Hartley. She asked me to let you know that the court received a letter from St. Bridget's Shelter. They held a ribbon cutting at the cottage. They named the kitchen after your grandmother." "Which name?" I asked, and my voice broke, because either answer was right. "Margaret,"